Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. In this episode, Peter, Vaill, and I give a lot of thought and conjecture to social-technical systems. Now, it sounds like something beyond normal attention, but it's not. The irony is that the social-technical system of a practice and a practitioner begs our attention constantly and is the object of our attention. People, tools, social organizations, and technologies governed by computers, always in our face. So as you listen to this conversation, you're actually involved in a social technical moment. So listen in.
How many of these things have we done anyway?
We have done 6. This is number 7.
Wow.
And we have done a lot of thinking and talking about practice. And by now, hopefully the readers are doing the same, thinking and talking. But where we touched on but didn't get to be able to tap into your deeper thinking about a conjecture is the one about systems dynamics, but particularly the socio-technical connection between the practitioner and everything that she and he and I and you need to get our job done and to move forward. So give us some thoughts on that.
That's just back to that whole issue of perception that we've talked about so many times in these podcasts. Well, I think I'm going to leave it to the curious reader to check out the history of socio-technical systems as popularized by the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, and in particular, Eric Trist, T-R-I-S-T, and Fred Emery, the Australian Fred Emery, who wrote several really seminal papers on systems thinking. Out of their preoccupation with systems thinking, Tavistock Institute is basically a research organization that does consulting and introduces change. They're not an OD company, but they do have a number of change projects going at any one time. With their systems point of view, as they began to look more and more closely at, in particular, coal mines, which was one of their major clients, in India, textile mills, totally different culture and a somewhat different technology, but still workers and social systems and human behavior and all of those fundamental things. And they began to crystallize their realization that this so-called system that they were so interested in and involved in was not just human beings. No matter what the engineers said, it was not just technology, that it was a blend or an integration or a melding of human beings and their characteristics and their needs and objectives and values, and technologies and their needs and values and characteristics. And that you couldn't, in the first instance, make a distinction between these two sets of elements, that they were in fact woven together. And that the system was this, as I use the word melding, this amazing melding of human beings and non-human systems, technologies, and physical objects, I guess, including the way rooms are set up and the way jobs are defined and so forth. And the owners of the technical side, there are 2 or 3 professions who quote unquote own the technical side. They're the specialists in designing jobs and work systems. And that includes production engineers and industrial engineers, a profession, by the way, which I had done quite a bit of work with because I had met a few at Eastman Kodak who were trained as industrial engineers but were quite fascinated by the OD variables that were being crystallized in the early and middle 60s. Motivation, work group behavior, leadership issues, And they were beginning to accept the idea that a work system was not just a highly detailed and rationalized collection of job design criteria and characteristics, that it also had to be equally considered the human beings who were in those jobs. And they took all that very seriously, and they came to our doctoral program and our senior professors at the business school. And out of that came a summer appointment for me with industrial engineers at the last year of my doctoral work. And it was a tremendous learning experience for me. Cut to the chase on this, the socio-technical ideas that had been developing in the late 50s and early 60s at the Tavistock Institute. And these ideas that these engineers, these behaviorally oriented, or you might call them humanistic industrial engineers, developing. And the work of a man named Charles Walker at Yale, who had written a book of readings called Modern Technology and Civilization, which included all of the key articles that were circulating on human behavior in organizations, not just on technology. There were a number of things going on that all of which kind of came together in this notion that the work system we're talking about is a blend of human beings and technologies. And I think what I have done, and you and I have done together, is applied a lot of this thinking to the relationship between a practitioner and his or her tools of the trade, so to speak.
Right.
And the more you reflect on it, and this is the heart of our conjecture, the more you reflect on it, the clearer it is that every practice, almost without fail, every practice, even practices that are ostensibly pure human behavior, like psychiatry, for instance, are heavily instrumented and involved with technologies. I mean, the analyst's couch
Yeah.
is no trivial technology to the analyst. I mean, we chuckle about it, but a serious therapist doesn't chuckle about it. A serious therapist pays a lot of attention to the way the room is set up and the background music he's offering, if any, the light level, the sound level that might be penetrating the room, and so forth. All of those things are part of the methodology, I guess you would say, but they're technical items, technical elements that go into what is ostensibly a purely human behavior practice. I can't think of a single practice that doesn't have its respective tools of the trade. I don't know if you can.
No, not at all. No. And it goes to the fundamental definition we've been working on, or the point of departure of our thinking about context, about practice is always occurring in a moment in time, which then dictates the context and circumstances that one needs to take into account.
Which are heavily technical elements.
And there they are. This gives you and me a chance to be more specific about what goes on in that context and how you can adjust those circumstances to benefit practice, as would that psychologist who's checking out the office before the first client comes in.
You and I have both encountered practitioners who, for whom, if the context isn't right, quote unquote right, they almost feel they can't do their job.
Yeah.
Not all, but plenty almost feel they can't do their job. And maybe might be another practitioner faced with the same set of circumstances who says, "Oh, shoot, we can make this work." But it depends very heavily on the practitioner's attitude toward himself or herself and this system that they are part of. But anyway, I guess we're in agreement that practice is a socio-technical phenomenon. And the practitioner himself or herself is a heavy element of the socio part, but there are plenty of other people in the practitioner's environment who constitute elements of the socio-technical system: supervisors, other colleagues, clients themselves, and the client context in which the client is functioning. The list goes on.
It sure does.
So that's all a system. It's not an unmanageable system because people manage it every day. Some manage it with great skill and others rather clumsily. But the system is there with every practitioner, and they might try to banish it, but they can't banish it. They might try to control it, and some practitioners are legendary in their preoccupation with controlling the whole system. Barbara Streisand is famous for that.
Diva.
Michael Jackson, I think of. There are plenty of others who are. Rudolph.
Nureyev.
It's a conductor of the Chicago Symphony. I'm trying to remember Rudolph. Anyway, is famous for having everything to be just right in order to perform the music successfully. So obsessiveness is not a foreign element for many practitioners. But on the other hand, there are other practitioners, and you think of golfers who are pretty casual about how things are set up, don't seem to care too much about everything having to be just right.
I think, by the way, I'm breaking your train of thought here, but I go back to the original thinking about practice, and the key word there was the intention to achieve results. Now, intention itself can be minor, weak, maybe, we'll see, all the way up to a very high bar that one sets oneself to perform at the level of excellence, however that's defined.
Yeah.
So the folks we're talking about, if your intentions are relatively light, then I assume that the context, the tools, the technology may or may not work. It's okay, we can get through it. But I can think of an instance in my story when my intention to be an effective teacher was very high indeed, and I stepped into my first classroom in a public campus of Connecticut College, and the room was horrible. It had the old armchair jet desks. It had blackboard curtains still on the windows from World War II. It had a blackboard and chalk, and I don't like blackboard chalk. And the floors weren't clean. On and on it went. And I almost threw, because I had just moved down from a campus where everything was nice and spiffy. And I almost walked away, which 30 years later plus, I'm very glad I didn't. And I must say, all those conditions were very much improved. But what I did then is I said, okay, let's learn from this, folks. Let's look around. How could you be seating more comfortably in order to learn? How could you ignore some of the horrible graffiti from the 1920s that are written on the arm of your desk so we can concentrate? And we used that crummy classroom as an example. And when I was in school with you, the conditions weren't all that much more elegant at that flagship university either, were they? But we talked about making do, and then we made it work.
Yeah, I remember it vividly. I wonder if I could kind of bring this particular focus of practitioners being so deeply embedded in the tools of their trade and the systems with which they are integrating themselves. If I could bring this kind of to a close with a kind of a maybe a little bit far-fetched, I hope not, quotation from the astronaut Michael Collins.
Mm-hmm.
He was the astronaut who stayed up in the command module while Armstrong and Aldrin went down to the surface of the moon. And he's quoted in a book that Norman Mailer, the novelist, wrote about the Apollo program called Of a Fire on the Moon. Magnificent book. And maybe only an artistically sensitive novelist could have heard Collins for the meaning that it had for him and bothered to write down the quote and make sure he used it in his almost 500-page book. The quote reads as follows. This is Michael Collins speaking. Those fuel cells are funny things. It's not that they either work or don't work. They are like human beings. They have their little ups and downs. Some of them have bad days, and then they sort of cure themselves. Others are hypochondriacs. They put out lots of electricity, but they do it only bitterly with much complaining and groaning. And you have to pat them and talk to them sweetly. For any who are interested, that appears on page 239 and 240 of Mailer's book, Of a Fire on the Moon. You have to pat them and talk to them sweetly. Well, who ever heard of one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology that was ever invented being patted and talked to sweetly? Well, who had heard of it is a practitioner who's sensitive to the interaction between himself and the technology that he is operating. So
makes it even more compelling when you realize that fuel cell, or those fuel cells he was talking about, were the ones that they were relying on to get back to Earth after after they came off the moon. So I would be really speaking very kindly to those fuel cells at that moment.
It's the do or die of the mission.
Yeah.
And he's patting them and talking to them sweetly.
It reminds me of some famous musicians who have a violin that is so important to them that it's priceless. I also remember Willie Nelson's autobiography, in which he talks about that guitar, and he's just recently decided not to go back out on the road another year. But that guitar was with him from the time he was in his early, maybe 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah.
And when I watched him in concert a few years back, I noticed that the part underneath the strings where the fingers go through and strum was basically wearing down from tens of hundreds of thousands of strokes that man used. But the connection between Willie and that guitar was is part of his magic. Don't you agree?
Oh, yes. And you're reminding me of the 1972 Olympics in Munich, which was famous for the terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. But another thing that happened in that Olympics was that Bob Seagren, who had done his collegiate career, I believe, at USC, was our premier pole vaulter, and he was supposedly a lock for the gold medal in the pole vault. And at the last minute, his pole was disqualified, and he had to jump with a backup pole. And on television and watching it, Jim McKay interviewed him after the competition, where he had only gotten the silver medal, and asked him if the requirement that he jump with the backup pole had anything to do with him getting just the silver medal. And Seagren's answer, and this is a direct quotation, Seagren's answer was to Jim McKay, "Well, Jim, a pole is a very personal thing to a pole vaulter." I think that makes the point.
It makes the point.
And if that doesn't make the point, how about this one? Harvey Phillips, who was the principal tubaist of the New York Philharmonic and was famous for a number of things, but most famous in my mind for having organized a Christmas concert in Rockefeller Center for 300, count them, 300 tubas. And
we've made the points, and now let's think a bit out loud how recognizing this melding and this personalization, if you will, of critical aspects of technology is under the control, if it is under the control of the practitioner herself. Or is it a natural thing?
Well, I hope it's under some control, in the sense that the practitioner has plenty of latitude to in the interaction that he or she has with the technology and with its characteristics. The practitioner has, and so it's a system of semi-control and intervention, not just a purely natural phenomenon that has its own life, and the practitioner is just one more unconscious element. And in fact, we've stressed the word consciousness several times.
Yes.
In that way of thinking that we've developed for the nature of practice. And I think it speaks specifically of the conscious modification and development of oneself. So maybe that's the thing that distinguishes, one of the main things that distinguish the practitioner from the non-human elements of a system is that by and large, the human being has consciousness, or at least to a greater degree than do the non-human elements. We always have to allow for Michael Collins' point that they groan and they complain almost as if they were human beings. That's, I guess, his point, that they almost seem to have consciousness.
I think in the examples you've given so far, something also occurs to me, Peter, that the people who are closest to the Willie Nelson's guitar and Barbra Streisand and even the astronauts, is that we look at them as having achieved a very high level of excellence. And while we refer to excellence off and on throughout our conversations, I wonder if you have some thoughts about that. It's a pretty fluid notion, but when it's invoked, it's usually put to an example of a person and their system, external technical system, that works optimally at that moment, like the great 350-yard drive in the last hole of a golf champion. So again, the question is excellence, and how working one's system within any moment of time can one understand why their quest for excellence is what tends to lift up their intentions to succeed.
Well, it seems to me that every practitioner, every practice probably has its own performance requirements, and maybe some kind of a semi-invisible line, so to speak, between what is acceptable or sufficient on the one hand, and what is not. And beyond successful and sufficient, it kind of goes on up from there as a practitioner becomes more and more determined to achieve a high level of effectiveness in the practice. And I suspect different practitioners vary widely on the subject of how I'm stumbling here because I'm looking for something in one of the books that I'm using.
No, that's good. That last quote was great. Let's get another one on the record.
Well, I wanted to talk about some of the different definitions of excellence.
Okay.
The classic book on excellence is the the book by Tom Peters and Bob Waterman, In Search of Excellence. Nowhere in that book that I'm aware of do they deal with the question of a problem that has come up repeatedly in our podcasts, namely that perception is all there is, so to speak. That is to say, different people see the same situation differently. And you need to be very careful in thinking about what you actually mean by excellence. As I was working on it, suddenly it came to me one time, this is a semi-wisecrack, but I think captures the point I'm making, that winning is only the thing you think winning is. This plays a little bit of a twist on the famous Vince Lombardi statement about winning is not everything, it's the only thing. And one time when he was asked if he had actually said that, his response was, "No, but I wish I had." So whatever it means, apparently rang some bells with Vince Lombardi. But in any event, winning is only the thing you think winning is. And different people will define winning differently. Think about sports, for instance. One player plays hurt, and that's winning for him or her. And another player will not play hurt, and that's winning for him or her. One team wins by a point, another team wins by a boatload of points. Is one team, quote unquote, better than the other team by those amount of points? And you can get some nice conversations going in a bar over that question. Winning is only the thing you think winning is. And in particular, some of the ways of thinking about excellence that have come to me as I've reflected on it. One is that a practitioner is performing well against some known criteria or standard, an external criterion or standard. And that's probably the most famous one. But another one is that a practitioner is performing well against their own potential level of performance. The New York Yankees have had a batter this year named Aaron Judge, who's, I believe he's 6'7" and weighs 250 pounds or something. And he was, at the beginning of the season, everybody said he was going to break the home run records that Barry Bonds and others have set. And he hasn't done that. He's hit a lot of home runs, but he hasn't done that against what is assumed to be their potential level of performance. Another is that they're performing excellently in relation to where they were at some earlier point in time. It's sort of a developmental criterion of excellence, having come a long way back from an injury, for instance, or working with what is perceived to be inferior equipment, or working with others who are not well trained. And yet they perform well as a team, that are judged by informed observers to be doing substantially better qualitatively than other comparable systems. Qualitative criterion, often very important, and knowledgeable observers who like to who commentate on political systems and political practitioners, or sports, or the performing arts, or the world of business, the qualitative performance. Another one is that they they do what they do with significantly fewer resources. Another is that they're perceived as exemplars because of the source of their ideas and inspiration for others. You might call that a style criterion. Another is such a high level the ideals for the culture within which they exist. What's excellent in one culture is not necessarily excellent in another, but you might say they are perceived to have nobility, no with an N, mobility. And then a final one that I was able to crystallize is they're the only organizations that have been able to do what they do at all, climb Mount Everest or whatever it is.
As I was listening to that and thinking of it with my teacher mind, I realized that implicitly, or maybe sometimes right out in front, I have expressed a hope that my learners will excel in life writ large, certainly in my class and other classes. Some of them I didn't have to hope very hard because it was in them to want to excel, and they intended to do it, and they went ahead and figured out how to work the conditions around to standing out among their peers early in their lives. And I've been in touch with some of those folks over the last 10, 15, 20 years. They're still doing it. So it's kind of a mystifying thing.
Yes.
Who would we not want to excel? Well, I can think of a few folks, but fundamentally, teacher or not, we really enjoy seeing people we care about excel. And so I'm not even sure my point here, except that excellence continually is injected into the mix. And now I hear winning is what you think winning is.
Yeah.
So is excellence what a person sets for herself as excelling? And be damned if everyone else is disappointed. For me, it's excellence.
I think that's what it comes to, Dave. I'm doing well. I guess the way you could put it is my own personal criteria are governing. They govern. And I don't care what anybody else says. I'm doing well, or I'm doing the best I can. And you and I have both known people who say sometimes rather defensively, but they still say, I'm doing the best I can.
Mm-hmm.
And that counts as a criterion of excellence, I think. And we're applying, remember, we're suggesting that these conjectures all are apply to practitioners and their work, and that it's not, we started by saying it's not a mechanical phenomenon of human being plus non-human being, that it's much more integrated and a much more intimate connection than that in the system, the socio-technical system that is practice. And we now are saying, I think, that the practitioner and the practitioner's own opinion of how he or she is doing is a possible criterion of excellence. And I think that has some merit myself, particularly in very complex and very difficult areas of practice, where the last one I read, that namely the practitioner is one of the few or the only one who's able to do this thing at all, counts then as a criterion of excellence.
I love that one.
Yeah.
I know in our Westerner way of looking at life, we're always amazed at someone who has done that. We call it breakthrough, or we call it original. Yet, in proportion, if you're doing something you've never done before and you see yourself achieving that, hell with whether the rest of the world is applauding. It's a darn good feeling.
Yes.
You know, and I think going back again one more time to our mothership thought, changing circumstances, some of which you can control, which we've talked about today, but others that are way beyond our control can knock anyone off their block and or open up a window to a whole new way that a person can express herself suddenly. And now it's back to intention. Do you intend to get up from being knocked off the block? Do you intend to look out through that window and start to see new possibilities? We hope so, because I think we have continually gained for ourselves, you and me, more and more appreciation for the elegance of practice as it's performed by each and every individual. So we're moving back to our time clock again. We have a few more minutes or moments to kind of put a cap on this one, and soon we'll be recording the next. So final thoughts, Peter?
Well, I guess I want to come back and wondering in terms of my own internal criteria of excellence, have I or have we sufficiently captured this notion that the socio-technical system is not just socio plus technical in a mechanical way, that the characteristics of the technology and the characteristics of the practitioner meld, and that neither is the same after their interaction with each other.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that even the non-human elements, if we take that Michael Collins quotation seriously, even the non-human elements are different in certain ways from their interaction with the human beings in that practice. And it's because of their interaction with the practitioner. They are not freestanding, that's the word I'm looking for. They are not freestanding elements that are fixed and unchangeable. And if a practitioner thinks that, they begin to feel, perhaps in the longer run, they begin to feel that they are somehow the prisoner of their technology. And my hunch is, my conjecture is, that no effective practitioner thinks of himself or herself as the prisoner of their technology. Only the beginner or the one who has not thought very deeply about it feels that they are the prisoner, that they do not have the opportunity to grow and modify the system as they are living in it. So I hope we have succeeded in that point.
I believe you have, and I pictured a moment yesterday. I played in a charity golf tournament to raise scholarship money for Connecticut students, and I was out on the course, and over in the next fairway, I heard someone shout quite an epitaph, and then...
Shout what?
An epitaph, and I can't say it on camera because I'm too much the gentleman. But anyway, along with shouting that, he added the club after the club, and up into the air it went, spiraling, and landed in a pond.
Yes.
Now, it sounds like a cartoon, but I saw it. It happened. He blamed the club for a crappy shot, I guess. So I wouldn't want to play golf with that guy. So I think we brought this together very nicely, and I look forward to what we're going to do next. But in the meantime, thank you for hanging with us here and making this particular 45 minutes pretty magical.
Thank you, Dave.